This is All India Radio. In the program SAMVAAD, now we bring you a discussion on achievements of Ministry of Commerce Industry during the first year of the NDA government's second term. The participants are Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Economic Analyst, and AIR Correspondent Arjun J. Chaudhary.
Shubhamoy, if you look at the ease of doing business report for 2020, it appears that we are now ranked 63rd among 190 countries, and the improvement has been by 14 places. We were earlier ranked 77 in 2019, and now in 2020, we are ranking 63rd. How important is the Ministry of Commerce and Industry in this report?
Arjun, you have highlighted this report and the role of the Ministry of Commerce. As you know, for doing business, essentially there are two parts. One is business coming from outside India. The other is business that emanates from within India. And the Ministry of Commerce has got two arms, which is the Ministry of Commerce and the Department for Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, which basically looks at these two aspects. When one looks at those, so one realizes that any improvement in the country's capacity to do business would largely have to be guided by one or the other of these arms of the ministry. That means investor is coming from abroad. Then the investor would have to be guided by the Ministry of Commerce as to what are the salient policies in India, how significantly those policies here, what the investor is bringing in, and of course also what are the different state level issues that the investor would face. Similarly, for the internal trade, the reasons why a lot of Indian business often run up against what they call euphemistically red tape is that there are differences at the municipal level, at the state level, and at the central level in terms of the regulations, the clearances that they can get. For instance, there are also some measures that are made about how many clearances that are needed to start a business in India. And it varies so widely across states that companies often want to know if there can be a common template in which one can run and start a business in India. And answer to these sort of questions can only be provided by the Department of Industry, Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade. There is very significant role embodied in the government's business for these two departments to ensure that business is up and going. And obviously they must have been doing something right for India to have consistently gone up the scale of doing business. This is something which is worth thinking about. This is something that where there are a lot worth even now to do in terms of improving the way in time in which business is done. There, how the local business is doing becomes very important sort of yardstick for the Commerce Ministry to be able to encourage investors from abroad to come in.
So clearly you spoke about the risk involved in the delivery of goods and services because of supply chain disruptions. But earlier, the problem was associated with clearances, compliance requirements, regulations which were rigid and not flexible. But when it comes to the ease of doing business, we're also looking at the enforcement of contracts. In a typical sale purchase for goods and services, you have the delivery of goods and services. You also have the payment and the settlement of transactions. So you have commercial system which is ably associated with commercial banking as well. Wouldn't you agree?
Essentially, how well is the system running will be determined by how well it is able to enforce contracts. One can write out any number of laws, but unless those laws are implemented, the investor finds that she is still hemorrhaging money. So essentially, the enforcement of contracts becomes a very critical part. Now, in the list of ease of doing business that we have improved on, one of the bottlenecks remains the problem of enforcing contracts. It's not that there are no adequate judicial structure in India. Problem is that there's probably an excessive judicial structure in India, which often gives rise to what is called filibustering. Possible for somebody somewhere to create problems which affect the smooth flow of goods and services. And that is where companies often find themselves shortchanged. For instance, in sectors like power, in sectors like retail, in sectors like even the one that we have right now facing all around us, that of medicine. There are so many municipal level issues that need to be solved, that companies often find themselves spending more time and energy and therefore money in solving those rather than providing the services for which they have been set up.
We also find that in the payment and the settlement of transactions, we spoke about commercial banking. The letter of credit is extremely important in building confidence with the supplier so that both internal and external trade is not compromised. Along with that sentiment in the business community, we find that the startup initiative has also gained in importance. Right now, there are about 26,000 startups recognized under the Startup India initiative. How do you find the combination of these factors improving our balance of trade?
Certainly, Arjun, the very number that you're talking about of startups would not have come about unless there's something right happening. If the process was getting more and more difficult, you find the number of startups actually declining. The very fact that they are rising, and in fact, some estimates say they're about the third largest in the world, shows that India must be getting some of its act right. Commercial contract, the commercial relationship that any business holds with banks, that would think one of the areas where we have made improvement. Why so? Because those are largely under the control of this central government. And the sensitivity to ensure that business gets a good handholding and is able to get credit, is able to get working capital, is much more understood in the central government as well as in the departments of central government. At the state level, what happens is there's a huge variety. There are some states which are massively experienced and in terms of providing the effort and support to entrepreneurs. There are lots of states which need to do a fair amount of work even now to set up the basic building blocks. So, for instance, you find that states do not have even established industrial chambers or ability to think that what is it that the investor would need. So what I'm saying is that the performance level or the support level drops off sharply when one travels from center to individual states. And of course, there's a third level, which is the municipal level, which we can talk about later, but which is another world of its own.
Well, apart from that, the startups are also encouraged by the fundraising opportunities to infuse capital into their business. There are also amendments to the income tax Act. What is the minimum percentage of holding of a share capital or voting rights in the startup, which has been relaxed to 25%. So how important do you see these minor tinkerings in regulations and compliances actually aiding and assisting the growth in the volume of trade?
Certainly. These may seem very minor, but they are not minor to the business concerned. And in fact, again, what happens within India is that often governments at different levels try to write in too many regulations. They write regulations with the best of intent to help companies. But what happens is that the excessive number of regulations soon start conflicting with each other. And that's where the problem comes along. What does happen is that the best done when business gets a chance to work on simple rules. Our tax rules, as indirect tax is concerned, thanks to the GST, have largely reached a sort of a pan-Indian coherence. But that can't be said about direct taxes. And more than direct taxes, what happens is when the tax policies are right, sometimes the interpretation by the different tribunals leaves a lot to be desired. And that is where tax arbitrage comes in. The companies realize there is a possibility of actually raising their receivables by simply making changes, getting a favorable verdict from the court. They would rather pitch for that instead of trying to push for larger sales of goods and services. So the company actually starts sort of not abandoning, but paying less attention to its core work and more attention to managing the system. That is something that we have been, by making the direct tax code, some of it has been simplified, but taxation is something that, again, where we can do a fair bit of work to ensure that the investors do focus on running their business rather than running the tax business.
Ease of doing business, where we are now ranked 63rd from the earlier ranking of 77. In the Global Innovation Index, our ranking has improved from 81 to the present 52. How important is the entire startup initiative when it comes to innovation and ensuring that the product or service that we are producing is globally competitive in both the internal and the external market.
It would not have been possible for us to have gone up the innovation index had we not been doing something good in terms of our policies on taxation and related matters, because their innovation is very strongly dependent on what is the financial infrastructure that is provided. Company or entrepreneur will not just be interested in innovating something, she will also be interested in ensuring that innovation leads her to the market. Now, that means monetizing innovation. So something there is obviously happening. That in terms of monetizing innovation, it is easier now. Companies are able to create smart business ideas and can see in a quick time that business idea getting implemented. Because once that happens, then the venture capital guys also find it much more practical and useful to give that extra fund to the companies to be able to expand their business. And simultaneously, what happens is the people who are providing the investment, the venture capital people, also find that there's an escape route, which is that exit route, which is the raising of public issues. So that has also been simplified quite considerably. In fact, India has been rather good at providing that sort of an exit route, which is why companies find it easier to invest in India as well as to withdraw from the investment. That is something where we have got our act right.
We also find that to support innovation, there have been amendments in the Patents Act and the rules incorporated so that startups are able to secure the license or create patents. There are also other intellectual property rights like designs, copyright, a trademark that identifies the company or their product, and the geographical indication of the product as well. The filing has been made a lot easier, and we find that these startups all part of the MSME system.
Had we not been getting the innovation index right, we wouldn't have traveled so far here. And this is obviously the monetizing of the investment idea, which is especially important in the case of services economy. And India is largely a service economy. So large number of companies which are coming into the market are coming in with ideas which are not manufacturing but that of services sector. And for them, the protection of IP, protection of the requisite patents, protection of the ability to expand the patent to add on more strength to the company's capital by taking on loans. All of these are, these are the ones where India has actually been able to do quite a bit. And that is what is showing. It's not showing as much in the manufacturing sector, for instance, where the rules for import as well as for export, the rules for production are still something which will require quite an amount of time to come through, where we can say that these are also of the global standards.
So there is right now a shift in economic policy as well. We find that the focus is not just on promoting services sector, but manufacturing as well for startups to flourish and provide employment in the economy. And how do you see this calendar year performance of the Ministry of Commerce and Industry in terms of the opportunity presented with what's happening in China?
Well, if you look at the data, in 2020, that is FY 2019-20, India has drawn in something like $49 billion. This is the UNCTAD data, and it has been about a 15% rise over other countries. And compared to the amount of total FDI flowing into the rest of the world, rest of the developing countries, approximately about $650 billion, the India's performance is obviously very impressive, because the only other country which is larger than India in sweepstakes here is China, about $130 billion. But remember, China this year had sort of flattened out, whereas India's rise of FDI has been very impressive. It shows that the policies together, both of DPIIT as well as of the Department of Commerce, have been able to convince investors that there is significance, that there is usefulness to putting in money into the Indian stock market, into the Indian companies for larger and quicker returns.
Thank you so much, Shubhamoy.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on achievements of the Ministry of Commerce Industry during the first year of the NDA government's second term. The participants were Shubhamoy Bhattacharjee, Economic Analyst, and AIR Correspondent Arjun J. Chaudhary. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.